Cakes and Ale by Edward Spencer. Chapter 1. Breakfast. The day breaks slow, but Ian must man break fast. Formal or informal, an eccentric old gentleman. The ancient Britain's breakfast in the days of good Queen. Besse few tea statistics, Garraways, something about coffee brandy for breakfast, the evolution of the staff of life, free trade, the cheap loaf, and no cash to buy it. This is a very serious subject. The first meal of the day has exercised more influence over history than many people may be aware of. It is not easy to preserve an equal mind or keep a stiff upper lip upon an empty stomach, and indigestible foodstuffs have probably lost more battles than sore feet and bad ammunition. It is an incontestable fact that the great Napoleon lost the battles of Borodino and Leipzig through eating too fast. When good digestion waits on appetite, great men are less liable to commit mistakes, and a mistake in a great man is a crime than when dyspepsia has marked them for her own, and this rule applies to all men. There should be no hurry or formality about breakfast. Your punctual host and hostess may be all very well from their own point of view, but black looks and sarcastic welcomings are an abomination to the guest who may have overslept himself or herself, and who fails to say good morning just on the stroke of 9 o'clock. Far be it from the author's wish to decry the system of family prayers, although the spectacle of the full strength of the domestic company, from the stern-featured housekeeper, or the chief lady's maid, the housekeeper, is frequently too grand, or too much cumbered with other duties to attend public worship, to the diminutive page-boy, standing all in a row, facing the cups and saucers, is occasionally more provocative of mirth than reverence. But too much law and order about fast-breaking is to be deplored. "I'm not very punctual, I'm afraid, Sir John," I once heard a very charming lady observe to her host, as she took her seat at the table, exactly 10 minutes after the line of menials had filed out. "On the contrary, Lady V," returned the master of the house with a cast-iron smile, "you are punctual in your unpunctuality, for you have missed prayers by the 6th part of 1 hour, every morning since you came. Now what should be done to a host like that?" In the long ago I was favored with the acquaintance of an elderly gentleman of property, a most estimable, though eccentric man, and he invariably breakfasted with his hat on. It did not matter if ladies were present or not. Down he would sit, opposite the ham and eggs or whatever dish it might chance to be, with a white hat, with mourning band attached, surmounting his fine head. We used to think the presence of the hat was owing to partial baldness, but as he never wore it at luncheon or dinner, that idea was abandoned. In fact, he pleaded that the hat kept his thoughts in, and as after breakfast he was closeted with his steward, or agent, or studgroom, or keeper for several hours, he doubtless let loose some of those thoughts to one or the other. At all events we never saw him again till luncheon, unless there was any hunting or shooting to be done. This same old gentleman once rehearsed his own funeral on the carriage drive outside, and stage-managed the solemn ceremony from his study window. An under-gardener pushed a wheelbarrow, containing a box of choice cuttings, to represent the body, and the butler posed as chief mourner. And when anybody went wrong, or the pall-bearer's 6 grooms failed to keep in step, the master would throw up the window sash, and roar, "Begin again." But this is wandering from the subject. Let us try back. Having made wide search amongst old and musty manuscripts, I can find no record of a bill of fare of the first meal of the ancient Britons. Our blue forefathers, in all probability, but seldom assisted at any such smart function as a wedding breakfast, or even a hunting one, for the simple reason that it was a case with them of no hunt, no breakfast, unless one or other had killed the deer, or the wild boar, or some other living thing to furnish the refection. The feast was a Barmecide one, and much as we have heard of the strength and hardiness of our blue forefathers, many of them must have died of sheer starvation, for they had no weapons but clubs, and rough cut flints, with which to kill the beasts of the country who were, however, occasionally lured into pitfalls, and as to fish, unless they tickled them, the denizens of the streams must have had an easy time of it. They had sheep, but these were valuable chiefly on account of their wool, as used to be the case in Australia, ere the tinned meat trade was established. Most of the fruits and vegetables which we enjoy today were introduced into Britain by the Romans. Snipe and woodcock, and in the north grouse, may have been bagged, as well as hares. But these poor savages knew not rabbits by sight, nor indeed much of the feathered fowl which their more favored descendants are in the habit of shooting, or otherwise destroying for food. The ancient Britons knew not bacon and eggs, nor the toothsome kipper, nor yet the marmalade of Dundee. As for bread, it was not invented in any shape or form until much later, and its primitive state was a tough paste of flour, water, and occasionally, milk, something like the damper of the Australian bush, or the unleavened chapati which the poorer classes in Hindustan put up with, after baking it, at the present day. The hardy, independent Saxon had a much better time of it in the way of meat and drink. But with supper forming the chief meal of the day, his breakfast was a simple, though plentiful one, and consisted chiefly of venison pasty and the flesh of goats, washed down with ale or mead. A free breakfast table of Elizabeth's time, says an old authority, or even during the more recent reign of Charles II, would contrast oddly with our modern morning meal. There were meats, hot and cold, beef and brawn, and boar's head, the venison pasty, and the Warden pie of West Country pears. There was hot bread too, and sundry cates, which would now be strange to our eyes. But to wash down these substantial viands there was little save ale. The most delicate lady could procure no more suitable beverage than the blood of John Barleycorn. The most fretful invalid had to be content with a mug of small beer, stirred up with a sprig of rosemary. Wine, hippocras, and metheglin were potations for supper time, not for breakfast, and beer reigned supreme. None but home productions figured on the board of our ancestors. Not for them were seas traversed, or tropical shores visited, as for us. Yemen and Ceylon, Assam and Cathay, Cuba and Peru, did not send daily tribute to their tables, and the very names of tea and coffee, of cocoa and chocolate, were to them unknown. The dethronement of ale, subsequent on the introduction of these Eastern products, is one of the most marked events which have severed the social life of the present day from that of the past. With the exception of the Warden pie and the cates, the above bill of fare would probably satisfy the cravings of the ordinary Johnny of today, who has heard the chimes at midnight, and would sooner face a charging tiger than drink tea or coffee with his first meal, which, alas, but too often consists of a hot pickle sandwich and a brandy and soda, with not quite all the soda in. But just imagine the fine lady of today with a large tankard of Burton ale facing her at the breakfast table. _T_, which is said to have been introduced into China by Jarma, a native of India, about AD 500, was not familiar in Europe until the end of the 16th century, and it was not until 1657, when Garraway opened a tea house in Exchange Alley, that Londoners began tea drinking as an experiment. In 1662 Pepys writes, "Home, and there find my wife making of tea 2 years before he called it tea, a China drink, a drink which Mr. Pelling the apothecary tells her is good for her cold and defluxions." In 1740 the price of tea ranged from 7s to 24s per pound. In 1725, £370,323 were drunk in England, and in 1890, 194,008,000. In 1840, the duty was 2s, 2 1/4d per pound, in 1858 1s, 5d per pound, and in 1890, 4d per pound. The seed of the coffee tree which, when roasted, ground, and mixed with water and unmixed with horse beans, dandelion root, or road scrapings, forms a most agreeable beverage to those who can digest it, was not known to the Greeks or Romans, but has been used in Abyssinia and along the northeast coast of Africa almost as long as those parts have been populated. Here, in Merry England, where coffee was not introduced until the 18th century, it was at first used but sparingly, until it almost entirely took the place of chocolate, which was the favored beverage of the duchesses and fine madams who minced and flirted and plotted during the reign of the merry monarch, 50 years or so before. The march of knowledge has taught the thrifty housewife of today to roast her own coffee, instead of purchasing it in that form from the retail shopkeeper, who, as a rule, under-roasts the berry, in order to keep the weight in. But do not blame him too freely, for he is occasionally a poor law guardian, and has to keep pace with the stores. During the Georgian era, the hard-drinking epoch, breakfast far too often consisted chiefly of French brandy, and the first meal was, in consequence, not altogether a happy or wholesome one, nor conducive to the close study of serious subjects. The history of the staff of life _1 would require a much larger volume than this, all to itself. That the evolution of bread-making has been very gradual admits of no denial. And as late as the Tudor and Stuart periods the art was still in its infancy. The quality of the bread consumed was a test of social standing. Thus, whilst the _oat monde the height of society, lords and dukes, with countesses and dames of high degree, were in the habit of consuming delicate manchets, made of the finest wheaten flour of snowy purity, the middle classes had to content themselves with white loaves of inferior quality. To the journeyman and the prentice who had to endure with patience the buffets of master and mistress was meted out coarse but wholesome brown bread, made from an admixture of wheat and barley flour, whilst the agricultural laborer staved off starvation with loaves made from rye, occasionally mixed with red wheat or barley. The introduction of free trade by no means an unmixed blessing has changed all this, and the working classes, with their wives and families, can, when out of the Workhouse, in the intervals between strikes, enjoy the same quality of bread, that cheap loaf which appears on the table of the wicked. Squire and the all-devouring parson. In Yorkshire, at the present day, almost the worst thing that can be urged against a woman is that she canna mak a bit o' bread. Just look, wrote an enthusiastic free trader, a quarter of a century ago, at the immense change that has latterly taken place in the food of the English peasantry. Rye bread and peas pudding exchanged for wheaten loaves. A startling change, but not greatly different from what has occurred in France, where, with the abuses of the Bourbon rule, an end was put to the semi-starvation of French tillers of the soil. Black bread is now almost as much a rarity in France as on our side of the Channel, while barley in Wales, oats in Scotland, and the potato in Ireland, are no longer the food staples that they were. I have no wish for anything of a contentious nature to appear in this volume, but may deliver, with regard to the above, the opinion that peas pudding is by no means despicable fare, when associated with a boiled leg of pork, and I may add that too many of the English peasantry nowadays have been reduced, by this same free trade, to a diet of no bread at all, in place of wheaten, or any other loaves. Wedding breakfasts, with the formal speeches, and cutting of the cake, have gone out of fashion, and the subject of the British breakfast of today demands a new chapter.